Hello, I'm Margaret Gilbert from Corporate Contracts. I'm the Director of Corporate Contracts. I'm an international consultant and trainer in the area of procurement and contracts. I'm also asked to speak at international procurement conferences, and I'm also the author of the Contract Matters books, which there is a series which can be found on my website. Hello and welcome. My name is Margaret Gilbert from Corporate Contracts. Welcome to today's video, which is all about the Contract Matters books that I've written. So I thought we'd go through them one by one and just give you a brief idea about what each one is about and the value for both buyer and supplier. So the first book is Contract Matters, a practical guide to the contractual process, and I have one right here. So this is the first book that was written, and it is all about the whole procurement process from planning right through to contract award and beyond, and tips for both sides. So the value from the buyer side of things is to make sure that the tender document is put together in the right way, that it is not repetitive, that it is clear, and it has a clear, concise scope of work. And you need to be thinking about the evaluation process and the criteria, because that's one area that is often comes across with difficulty. So from the supplier side, when it comes to this particular book, is knowing and having a good understanding of the procurement process, and there are tips for both sides along the way, and especially for suppliers, so that it allows you to have a good understanding. So understanding the buyer mind in respect to procurement is a good thing, so that you can learn to manage when you do a proposal response. So the second book, which is Contract Matters, a practical guide for suppliers, is written specifically for suppliers, and basically outlines the issues that you need to be thinking about, not only just in terms of winning the contract, but equally through the term of the contract, and also to look at the issues when it's time for renewal and how to manage that, or when it goes out to be rebid. So the third book is Contract Matters Negotiation. Now this book is for both buyer and supplier, because it's always helpful to be able to negotiate well and to think about what you want to achieve. So there are 6 principles of negotiation which applies and is mentioned in this book, and those 6 principles are: know what your desired end result is. Point 2, what is your plan B in case your first position doesn't work? Point 3, what is your walkaway position? Now you might think at this point that you're doing really well here and you've done all your thinking, but you've only done some of the thinking, because you equally need to consider the other person's point of view and what their desired end result might be, which could be different from your own. To think about thinking about their plan B. You will never know it exactly, but you do need to think about it. And lastly, point 6, in terms of what their walkaway position could be. So all these principles are quite useful when you plan for the negotiation, and it's important to plan before you sit across the table from somebody. And the book goes through the issues in terms of how to manage that planning, what you need to think about, the desired end result, and equally a concessions plan, and to know that 80% of the final result will happen before you sit across the table from somebody. So the Contract Matters Negotiation book is going to be extremely helpful for you. So Contract Matters, Changing the Buyer-Supplier Conversation. This book is about exactly what the title says. The fact that there needs to be a change of conversation between buyer and supplier. It is time that both parties work together, and this book shows you how to do that and the reasons why, and what can be achieved if you do that. It's unfortunate that both sides seem to operate in a bit of isolation, and that while there's crossover, it's not as extensive as it could be. So the book outlines the issues about how to achieve that conversation. So good luck with that. So the book now mentioning is Procurement and Ethics, which is a book that covers off the need for procurement to be done in a transparent and fair way, and for the process to be ethical. So the book talks about, unfortunately, about what does happen in some parts of the world in relation to unethical and fraudulent behaviour and bribery and corruption. So the book talks about how to make your process transparent. So in terms of contract matters, contract strategies, strategic contracts, well, this book is about the need to have a strategy, a procurement strategy, which is really useful to have. So if you don't have a procurement strategy, then you're limiting yourself in terms of the procurement that you could do and what you perhaps you should be doing, and especially when looking ahead in terms of the first 1 to 3 years out or 3 to 5 years out. The other half of the book is about strategic contracts and the need to be aware of what your strategic contracts are and to recognise what is strategic and what is not. Sometimes contracts get lumbered in and put into the heading of strategic contracts when they're not strategic at all. So a definition of a strategic contract is that if the contract is that important to you, that if the supplier fell over or went out of business or any other aspect such as that, and it was going to hit you in your bottom line and going to be difficult for you, then that is a strategic contract, and you need to treat a strategic contract differently. So contract matters, procurement leaders and leadership. This book is primarily for buyers but can be useful for suppliers as well, and it outlines the need for that procurement requires leaders and leadership, and the book talks about how to achieve that and the need for procurement leaders. It talks about how to upskill to get to be in that situation and to be able then to provide leadership. So for suppliers, it could equally be useful because it's not just the buyer side that needs leaders and leadership, equally from the supplier side it does too. So it would be good to be able to provide some leadership and provide that to the buyer side, and you can add value by doing that. And lastly, Contract Matters, Procurement and Risk, which is the latest book in the Contract Matters series, and that talks about the need to look at risk when it comes to procurement for each and every procurement, and to be able to have a conversation about who is going to wear the cost of the risk, whether it's the buyer side or the supplier side. So it provides tips for both sides, and the need to have an honest conversation about who is going to be responsible or the sharing of that risk. So the above are the Contract Matters books that I'd like for you to be aware of. If you wish to get in contact, feel free to email me at margaret@corpcontracts.co.nz, and my website address is www.contractmatters.com. So happy reading, and thank you for listening. Bye-bye.